like to thank you for giving up some time to talk to me and my colleagues. My name's Liz, and I'm a member of the Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic Staff Network Support Group in Herts County Council. And we're leading on the promotion and celebration of Black History Month within the Council. This year, given the conversations that have started to happen in the UK and internationally about race, racism and its effects on people, we've been keen to talk to people with a BAME identity who have grown up in, lived or worked in Hertfordshire to talk about what it was and is like. One of the main things we want to talk about is the positive things BAME individuals and communities have given Hertfordshire. We want our Black History Month commemoration this year to consider some of the more recent history of Black people in Hertfordshire, as well as looking at the connections Hertfordshire has with slavery and its abolition. For Black History Month, we want to talk to people like you who were born in and grew up in Hertfordshire to hear about their experience. We wanted to speak to you in particular because you've gone on to be a highly successful person, both in the UK and abroad. You've been an award-winning journalist, columnist and editor-at-large of a national newspaper. You're a prize-winning author. You've presented radio and TV documentaries and are the new Professor of Sociology at the University of Manchester. So, after that introduction to this interview, I guess we should start your story from the beginning. Can you tell us what it was like for you growing up in Hertfordshire?
So I grew up in Stevenage. I was born in Hitchin. I think there wasn't a maternity ward in Stevenage when I was born. My family had recently, about 4 years earlier, 3 years earlier, had moved to Stevenage from Southeast London. My dad got a job with a wine company. So I was born in Stevenage in 69. You can do the maths in terms of how old that makes me. And my dad left when I was 1, rarely to be seen again, occasionally. And so my mum raised me and my 2 older brothers, who were 6 and 5 when my dad left. They chose Stevenage because they looked around, or it was Witchdale in Broadwater, because of the next door neighbour, they saw a lot of twitchy curtains, a lot of people were kind of, black family moving nearby, and there's this nice, I guess she was always old to me, but she was probably not much older than I am now, Mrs. Stilling, an elderly white lady who saw my mum come with my 2 brothers, and my middle brother was a baby in arms. I wasn't born yet. And she offered to warm up the milk for my mum. And that was the beginning of a very long, lovely relationship we had with Mrs. Stilling, who lived next door. And to be honest, we weren't the easiest of neighbours in a range of ways. 3 boys. I was often forgetting my key, climbing in through the window, not racket like loud music, but just a racket of a kind of busy family. My mum always worked at least 2 jobs. She was a nurse originally, and then she changed to being a teacher not long after my dad left, so she could have the holidays with us. And so, the garden was kind of, it was a bit of a mess. So there was that about us that, and we were also, and this was the kind of Caribbean influence from my mum, we were kind of achingly polite. We were, we worked very hard at school. My mum had this thing, you should always say hello to people, particularly old people when you see them in the street, because you don't know if they'll be there. So we were anomalous, and this was growing up in the 70s. So on the one hand, before the divorce laws changed, so not many people, there weren't many single parent families. So on one hand, we were like everything that they'd read about in the Sun and the Daily Mail, and this kind of single black family and kind of, chaos and all of that. And on the other hand, we were almost completely the opposite. So we were all kind of drilled to kind of work hard kind of at school, and my mum used to do a lot of community work, and you know, we were in the clubs, and my brothers played the violin, I played the tuba, so we were kind of quite a contradiction. And there was quite a lot of racism when, you know, when I was growing up. There was a family just up the road who would keep on sort of shouting abuse at us. And my mum called the police. At one stage, I think one of them tried to fight us or something, and the first policeman came, and this was the first time I heard the word ethnic minority, because he said, well, I'm afraid you're an ethnic minority, so this is something you're going to have to put up with. And my mum called the police station and said, I asked for a policeman, but you sent me an idiot. Can you send me a policeman, please? And a younger guy came and he went and spoke to them. And one of the weird things, and I still kind of mull about it now, is the degree to which that family and other families, on any given day, they might be shouting abuse at you. It might be about nothing, just something that they've read, or they just want to shout abuse at you. Or it might be because something happened, as they do with neighbours, you know, or I don't know, a dustbin lid flies into their yard, or a ball goes into their garden, or and you would get them a torrent of abuse. And then 2 days, 3 days later, they'll be over to borrow some sugar, or they will be, and so you saw the kind of, even when they couldn't always see the humanity in you, you saw that this was a thing that you had to kind of navigate, and you weren't entirely sure which one you were going to get. And there was one, it always sticks with me, this one incident of, it was a summer wind day with wind, and so with the front door and the back door were open, and a gust of wind blew the back door shut, slammed it shut, and my brother's finger got caught in it, and it was hanging off. He must have been about 9, so I'd have been 4. My other brother would have been 8. And my mum got on the phone to call the 999, and it was party line. And there was a guy at the top of the street, and he wouldn't get off the phone. And he was shouting, oh, you come over here, and you... And my mum's saying, oh, sorry, I just don't have time for this right now. I need to call an ambulance, and then you can come back on the phone. I'm really sorry, you know. You come up. Anyway, so my mum had to run to the top of the road, leave us in the house with my brother with his finger. I mean, they stitched it back on. It was kind of half hanging off. And call from the call box. And then many years later, so we used to call him Grumpy, Mr. Grumpy, and he lived up the road. Many years later, I'm not sure how he found out about this, but I was doing my O-level technology, and I was making a metronome. And he kind of forced me to let him make me a case for my metronome. And it was, I mean, you know, very, very British, and nothing was ever said. Nothing was ever said about what, but everybody knew. And I stood in his shed that had been his garage while he made me this metronome, and kind of chatted to me about school. He'd retired by then, and his wife bringing in tea and biscuits. It was really quite uncomfortable for me. I was 15 something, but it was his way of not talking about it and saying sorry all at the same time. And otherwise, my memory of Stevenage was that everything was fine. The schools were fine. I don't know that they were brilliant, but they were fine. And the teachers were dedicated. And I don't want it, not all of them, but enough of them. Not all of the schools were great, but enough of them were. It was at that time well provided. There was a bowling alley, there was a swimming pool. So my memory of growing up in Stevenage is why I have a lot of affection for the place, and why when I'm asked to do things that relate to Stevenage, or perhaps I generally say yes. That kind of I I had a good upbringing, and a lot of that was to do with Stevenage and the fact that at that time there were no sink states, there was nowhere you couldn't go. I don't know if it's changed now. People say it has. There was no school. All the schools I went to have either been closed down or had their names changed. But there wasn't a terrible school. There wasn't a terrible place. So you could just be. It felt fairly safe. So I have very fond memories.
Thank you, Gary. It's really interesting that you had that mix of kind of experiences. So thank you. It's really interesting. Next question I'd like to ask you, please, is who are the people who've had a particularly significant influence in your life in general, and in particular, and you've touched on this already a bit, your school and educational experience and your professional life?
So my mum had a huge impact, which is interesting the more I think about it, because she was out a lot. She worked as a teacher. She did summer playground. She did the Bowes Lion House. She ran a disco. So I mean, at St. Peter's Church. So she, it wasn't like it wasn't just that she wasn't a stay-at-home mum. She did a lot, but she had a huge impact on me. There were some good teachers at school. The headmaster, I'm going to miss some out, but the headmaster of my primary school, Mr. Tutt, was very good. My mum would do sort of deals with for things like school trips, because we couldn't afford to pay it in time, but they knew she was good for it. So they would say, okay, and then she'd pay it in installments. A teacher that really kind of springs to mind Heathcote was Mr. Hathaway, Honoran Hathaway, history teacher, who I thought was just, he was clever and engaged, and he clearly loved the craft of teaching, if you like. When I was I got put up a year, so I skipped a year. And when I got to the fourth year, which would have made me 13, I started doing French at college. I couldn't get all of my things in at the same time. So I did French at college, at Stevenage College. It's an ASDA now, maybe, what was the FE college. And there was, and this was where I learned, was given the gift of learning, really, inadvertently. There was a teacher called Pierre, silver hair, always used to wear grey, so he was kind of silver all down, big flares, I remember. And I was 13, and I went up to him after the first couple of classes, and I said, so, because he hadn't set any homework, and I said, do we have to do homework? And he said, you don't have to. No, you don't have to. But anything you do, I'll mark. And I went away and I thought, score. I don't have to do any homework. This is awesome. And I went for a couple of more weeks, and then I just thought, what are you doing here? Do you know what I mean? What's the point of you being here? And then I figured, well, I mean, there'd be a difficult conversation with my mum, but you don't have to come. But if you are going to come in, then you might just want to kind of work at it. And so I kind of went in completely the opposite direction. I thought, I want to be really good at this. And that was kind of the beginning of kind of owning my education, which is a real gift at that age. You can't kind of, it's very precocious age to learn that, but I kind of got really into it. And he was happy to do it all. And he took me all the way through to A-level. I had a friend who played the trumpet in the wind band and the orchestra called Dominic. And what I learned from Dominic, and this goes on from Pierre, was he wanted to be brilliant at the trumpet from kind of 16, well, that's when I got to know him. He wanted to be a brilliant trumpeter, and he did end up with a career in music. And it was, once again, that thing of like, why would you want to be not very good at something? Do you know what I mean? And he would comment on people who weren't very good at being shop assistants, or we'd go into a shop and someone would be really unhelpful, and he'd be like, why would you, what a waste. Do you know what I mean? Why would you want to? And I remember through him developing a real kind of why would you want to be like, take some pride in what you do, whatever it is that you do, because it wasn't a snobby thing. It was like, if you're going to be a dustman or a refuse collector, be a good one. Do you know what I mean? Do it well. And his mum, Denny, who particularly after my mum died, so my mum died when I was 19, who just kind of took me under her wing, really, and showed me kind of what compassion looked like. She died recently. She died in February, yeah. And just showed me what kind of compassion looked like and felt like. Now, I know I've missed a lot of people out there, but kind of certainly in terms of kind of growing up. And then there would be people from literature. There's a lot of Black women, actually, writers, Alice Walker, Maya Angelou, nearly all American. I didn't really figure out that there was a Black British history for quite some time afterwards, till afterwards. And some political people, Ken Livingstone, before he went off the rails, Tony Benn, that these were, and once again, I didn't really know an awful lot about the Black politics or Black history particularly. I mean, I knew the barest of bones. And then kind of, as I kind of grew up and developed, there'd be people like C.L.R. James and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, and Rosa Luxemburg and people like that who would be important to me. And then as I decided to become a writer, people like James Baldwin, as well as the kind of women that I mentioned before, Paula Marshall, who wrote Brown Girl, Brown Stones and was Barbadian American. So as I grew up, my kind of attention veered towards more literary things.
Thanks, Gary. It's interesting how you've had, kind of really significant people in your life, and then you've been able to draw on, from the sounds of it, other experiences to take, something about those people and use that to kind of develop yourself, really, by the sounds of it. So obviously you've spoken about your early life and your kind of early adulthood, but what was your route into journalism? How did you get into that field?
So I studied French and Russian. That's what I studied. I studied to be an interpreter and a translator at Heriot-Watt in Edinburgh. And I was also very politically involved, and I took a year out to be a student union officer, and I was very involved in the anti-apartheid movement, things like that. And what I realized towards the end, and my mum died at the beginning, which kind of meant I lost a year, really. I was still at university, and I managed to get through it, but I wasn't all there, really. What I realized by the end of it was that I didn't really want to be an interpreter or translator. I didn't really want to say what other people had said. I had things that I wanted to say myself, and that it had given me a kind of love of language, because translating and interpreting is about manipulating words from one context to another. And The Guardian, so I thought, you know, and I wrote a piece for the Scotsman about living in France. I wrote a few things for student newspaper. And I quite enjoyed it. And the things I did for the Scotsman, I got a check for, not for much, but it was, you know, it was the only thing that I really enjoyed that I got a check for. So I thought maybe I'll try this. But I didn't really know how to go about it. None of my family were in journalism. Didn't know any journalists. So I figured, oh, well, I'll carry on writing, but maybe I'll teach abroad, travel a bit. I like traveling. But then I saw this thing in The Guardian for bursaries for non-white people and people who would otherwise be discouraged from going into journalism. And I thought, I'll give that a whirl. So I wrote the application and I got an interview. And I went down for the interview and I got this bursary. It's not a job. It wasn't a job at The Guardian. It was, they took 6 of us and they paid for us to do a postgraduate course at City University. And then you were kind of on your own. And actually there was another boy who got it that year, who I'm still very good friends with. I gave the best man speech at his wedding, Randeep. He lived in Letchworth and he went to Stevenage FE College. So we weren't kind of, I mean, I didn't know him then, but, so I did that for a year, and I came out and I was kind of freelancing and interning and things like that. I got a chance at The Guardian, just day work, translating. And then they were looking, it was the end of 1993, the South African elections were coming up in 94, the Mandela elections. And they wanted someone young, black and cheap to go to South Africa. Nobody said that, but that was what they wanted. And I was the youngest, blackest, cheapest person in the office. And the guy who would go on to be the editor knew, because he'd interviewed me for the bursary. And so he said, because they knew that there were stories that they couldn't get, that the white journalists couldn't get. And so I was sent out to South Africa. And to cut a very long story short, nobody in my family could drive. My mum couldn't drive. I was 25 at the time. And I turned up in South Africa, and it's a place where you got to drive. So I would always be catching lifts one way, you know, paying people. And someone would take you somewhere, and then they would go off, and then you would kind of get a lift with someone else coming back. And one rally I went to, I was looking for a lift back, and I ended up being taken by Mandela's bodyguards. And basically, I amused them. I made it my business to amuse them, but I amused them. I'd been involved in the anti-apartheid movement. I studied in the Soviet Union for 6 months, and they'd been trained in the Soviet Union. I was 25, didn't really know what I was doing. Quite a sort of chirpy chappy, and I thought I was just kind of fun to have around. And so I ended up with this ringside seat on the whole thing, because they just let me travel around with them. So I would, you know, stay in the hotels that Mandela stayed in. I would see him, like, you know, quite often. I'm sure he just thought, who is he? And I was kind of a like very junior peripheral bit of his entourage, basically, for 6 weeks or so, a month or so, I guess. And I wrote a piece that went in on election day called The Black Night, and that really got me my job. And it was about, you know, being close up with this icon. You know, that's how I ended up getting my job.
Thank you, Gary. So that really links quite nicely into the next question, which is, how do you think your identity as a black man has positively or negatively influenced the progress you've made?
Well, I mean, I was raised, you know, with the adage, you have to work twice as hard to go half as far. Um, um, there's no saying what I'd be doing if I was white, because like that was never going to happen. And I guess being black in Britain, growing up when I did, what made me a critical thinker. Those things that I mentioned, the people one day being like this, one day being like that, from an early age, I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. Why are they like that? Why are we like this? Why does my mum say that about Ireland or Yvonne Goolagong? Like, why does my mum cheer for Yvonne Goolagong? You know, because she's a you know, she's a Maori. What? Why? Why does she have these opinions about this or that? Why is there a Barbadian flag on the door? And she says, when you come in here, you're in Barbados, and outside you can be English and all. So I'm constantly trying to figure it out, and then also process some of the abuse, some of the comments, some of the things that are completely well-meaning but kind of confusing. You know, people saying in response to racism, you're British just like me, and thinking, I'm not exactly like you though, am I? Do you know what I mean? Like I can feel that, and I can but understanding that that actually came from a kind of love, really, not from a kind of aggression. And so yeah, and it wouldn't have to have done that. It wouldn't have done that for everybody, but for me, it made me a critical thinker, and it made me also, because we were working class, but we were very kind of, you know, we played the tuba, and we did a kind of quite, I played the tuba, and I used to play a lot of chess, and so we're doing quite middle class things. And we kind of, you know, we all wanted to go to university, which most of my kind of mates didn't. But we were in Stevenage, we weren't in London. So when I would kind of be around like a load of black kids from London, I'd feel a little bit out of it. And so there was this kind of one step removed from almost every community that I was in. I was also kind of like in and kind of slightly on the outside, which gives you a kind of gimlet-eyed kind of understanding of, you know, where you fit in or where you don't fit in. And I decided to kind of take that on a critical path where there aren't really any easy answers, and where I'm a socialist, but I don't have romantic notions about who the working class are, because I grew up with them and they can be a terrible pain in the ass sometimes. I don't have romantic notions about being British, and I have romantic notions about being black. Do you know what I mean? All of those things are complicated for me, which is a very rich tapestry to work from if you're in the world of ideas.
So my next question for you is, what advice would you give to a young person wanting to achieve success in their chosen field? And do you think race, ethnicity, gender identity, or social class are factors young people need to be aware of?
So my advice would be, do what you love and do it as best as you can. You only get one life. One of the biggest lessons that I learned was from my mum dying at 44 when I was 19, suddenly. And thinking, it's not, we're not here very long. You speak to anyone, I'm 51, speak to anyone in their 50s and they'll tell you they don't know where the bloody time went. Do you know what I mean? I had an image of what a 50-year-old looked like and acted like. It wasn't me. So life is short, but it's long enough to make a difference, and it's long enough to find joy. So find the thing that you enjoy and be as good as you can at it. Now, all of the things make a difference. The race you are, the gender you are, your sexual orientation, your social class, all of those things will make a difference. And I don't think it's true or fair to say, but they'll only stop you if you let them, because it's not all in your gift. And I would say that my experience is that they all make a difference, and it's your burden, really, to navigate those things, to work out what you can tolerate, what you can't tolerate, to work out, you know, how you might succeed, what your successful. But the thing is that the world that you want to occupy doesn't exist yet because you aren't in it. So you have to create the world that you want to occupy. That's always been my feeling, that, like, you know, when I went for an interview at The Guardian, when I did the bursary interview at The Guardian, and they said, oh, what do you want to do? What would you do if you were a journalist? And I said, I'd quite like a job like Hugo Younge, who was the kind of one of the premier columnists, the premier columnist of the paper. And editor said, well, there's only one of those. There's only one of him. And I said, well, why shouldn't that be me? And I wasn't being arrogant. I can be arrogant, but I wasn't being arrogant in that moment. I was kind of saying, yeah, okay. Well, so you've never, I mean, he wasn't being rude. He was just saying, well, you know, it's like if someone said, I want to, you know, play centre forward for Liverpool or something. It's like, well, maybe you want to broaden your horizons a bit. But I guess my point is, probably if you come from an underrepresented group, then the role that you're seeking to play doesn't yet exist because you haven't yet made it. And so, and that's the burden in a way, that you have to make it. The joy is you make it, right? So there's not, you know, I remember feeling very liberated when I understood that while kind of really posh people who went to kind of private school and Oxbridge and all of that, that while they had all of the privileges and advantages of their social class, they also had to fight themselves out of a kind of predestined track about what they thought they should be. They couldn't just be to teach abroad, or they couldn't just do this, or they couldn't, because there was a series of kind of quite stern expectations about what their destiny was. And that I was free. I was free to imagine to be an interpreter, to be a writer, to be a teacher. And so, yeah, freedom is a burden, and that works both ways. You know, but the world you want, we have to build. We have to build the world we want.
Thank you. One last question. And I think that answer actually was really a powerful one, and I hope young people do hear it, because yeah, I think I think that people are free. Actually, people don't always necessarily see their freedom, they see their constraints. So for a young person to see that they are free and they have choices is really hugely powerful. But my last question for you, please, is what does Black History Month mean for you?
Well, most often what Black History Month means to me is an awful lot of requests to do a range of things, and you know, most of which I say no to because there's not time, and particularly every other year, but certainly every 4 years, I'm in the States for the presidential elections, and so I'm kind of not even here. As a kind of concept, I am aware of and have some sympathy with the kind of concern that like every month should be Black History Month, that they shove it all into one month, that kind of the accusation of lip service. I'm aware of all of those criticisms, and I think there is some validity to them. I also think that the opposite to Black History Month wouldn't be that every month's Black History Month, it would be no month. That's what we're working with. And so we need to work with this to see what else we can kind of pollinate for the other months. It's a notion I think that we can and should work with for other reasons. And if I have any kind of my challenge, my provocation, which I often do throw out at the beginning of Black History Month, is that actually we should think about whether there should be a White History Month. Now, the argument is, well, every other month is White History Month, but it's not. Every other month, they just call history. Like Black history is a subgenre of history, and white history is just history. But actually, you can't have Black people without white people. It's a nonsense. And white people have a history too. And what often happens with Black History Month is that we have to go out and explain everybody's history to them, both ours and white. We have to explain to everybody, there was colonialism, there was slavery, our people did this, well, those should be just part of history. And that when I think of, well, they are part of history, but they should be recognized as such. And so, you know, so often with Black History Month, it's told in the passive voice. People were enslaved. Rosa Parks was kicked off a bus. Well, she didn't kick herself off the bus, right? There was a person was involved. Mr. Blake, his name was. Well, so what happened to him? Who was he? How is it that we learn the history of her, but not the history of him? Now, White History Month, in my mind, would not be a month about racism. It would include all the formidable white people who've done wonderful things, the kind of abolitionists and the anti-Nazi League and the anti-colonialists and all the kind of wonderful people. But it would give white people a chance to do what we do, which is reflect on how we got here and who we are and what it means. Because I don't think we're the only people who need that. And so, would it be that there could be a month where white people got the space to talk honestly about being white people? Honestly and openly, not critically, not just in the same way that Black History Month should not all be about being oppressed and being downtrodden and being where we are more than just objects of racist oppression. White people are more than just purveyors of racist oppression, although they are that too, in the way that we are that too, or have been that too. Not all of them, but so I feel like the main problem I have with it is that we're the only people who get it, and that kind of would that other people got it so that they could interrogate themselves in the way that we do.
That's great. Thank you, Gary. I think that's really an interesting idea, actually. And I'd just like to say thank you so much on behalf of my fellow Hertfordshire BAME Staff Network Committee and network group members. It's been fantastic that you've given us your time to talk to us on and answer our questions so openly and completely. It's been a joy to have some time with you, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a joy.